I never thought I'd be the type of person to explore something abandoned, let alone a train. It wasn't like me to poke around in places I had no business being in. But this train was different. It had been sitting there, forgotten and rusting on the tracks for as long as anyone could remember. They called it the Phantom Train, not because of any ghost stories, but because it seemed to appear out of nowhere. One day, years ago, it had just shown up on an unused stretch of tracks outside of town. No one knew where it came from, and after a few attempts to tow it away failed, people just left it there as if waiting for it to disappear again. I had heard the stories from locals, but most of them were nothing more than urban legends. Kids would dare each other to go inside, but few ever did. They'd run up to the doors, peek in, and then bolt before going any further. Most of them said they felt like they were being watched or that the air inside was so thick it was hard to breathe. Of course, I was intrigued, but wasn't sure I believed in any of that. It was just a train, right? But curiosity got the best of me one night, and before I knew it, I was driving out to that isolated stretch of track, the headlights of my car slicing through the darkness as I approached the abandoned train. The closer I got, the more I realized how out of place it looked. It was like something pulled straight out of the past, with its old, rusting cars and broken windows. The metal groaned in the wind as if the train was alive, protesting against its abandonment. I parked my car a few feet away and got out, my boots crunching on the gravel as I approached the train. The night was quiet, save for the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But I pushed it aside. It was just nerves, I told myself. The train loomed over me, dark and menacing, its blackened windows giving off an eerie reflection of the moonlight. I walked around the side, looking for a way in. Most of the doors were rusted shut, but one of the passenger cars had a door slightly ajar. With a deep breath, I slipped inside. The air was stale and heavy, the smell of old leather and mildew hitting me the moment I stepped in. My flashlight flickered as I pointed it down the narrow aisle, illuminating the rows of seats, all covered in dust. It was like a time capsule. Everything had been left as it was, untouched for years. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The train creaked and groaned as if it were settling beneath my weight. I passed empty seat after empty seat, but something about the place felt wrong. It wasn't just the decay or the abandonment. It felt like I wasn't alone. I made my way through the first few cars, nothing out of the ordinary except for the eerie silence that followed me. It wasn't until I reached the front of the train that I noticed something strange. The door to the conductor's compartment was slightly open, just enough for me to see inside. I hesitated. I wasn't sure why, but something about that door unsettled me more than the rest of the train. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly in the quiet of the night, and that's when I saw him. The conductor. He was still sitting there in his seat, his hands resting on the controls as if he was still driving the train. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were open, staring blankly ahead. His conductor's hat was still perched neatly on his head, as if he had just taken his last shift. But he'd been dead for years. The smell hit me next, a sickly sweet odor of decay that had been masked by the musty air of the train. I covered my nose with my sleeve, fighting the urge to gag as I stepped closer. The conductor's uniform was faded, the fabric eaten away by time, but his body hadn't decayed the way it should have. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could he still be sitting there, preserved after all this time? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone found him before? I took a step back, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and then he moved. It was subtle, just a twitch of his fingers, but I saw it. My heart leaped into my throat as I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. I blinked, convinced that my mind was playing tricks on me, but when I looked again, his hand was resting on the controls, just like before. I didn't wait to see if he would move again. I turned and ran, bolting down the aisle as fast as I could. The train groaned and creaked beneath me, as if it was alive, as if it was angry that I had disturbed it. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I reached the door and shoved it open, nearly tripping as I stumbled out onto the gravel. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. But when I glanced back at the train, it was just sitting there, silent and still, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the conductor's face, his empty, staring eyes, and the twitch of his hand on the controls. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that maybe the shadows had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew the truth. The conductor was still there, still driving that train, even though it hadn't moved in years. I tried to forget about it, tried to push it out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. Every time I drove by that stretch of track, I felt a pull, like the train was calling me back, like it wanted me to come inside again. I never did, though. Once was enough. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the sound of the train's whistle in the distance. It doesn't make sense. It hasn't moved in decades. But the sound is unmistakable, a long, mournful wail that echoes through the night. And when I hear it, I know the conductor is still out there, waiting for his next passenger.